Hello everyone, this is your friend and I am back with a new fanfic part 2. The fanfic title is What If Naruto Broke His Own Rule Against Time Travel Part 2. I hope you enjoy this fanfic, and if you enjoy this, so don't forget to subscribe my channel. Now let's start the fanfic. Hinata Uzumaki ne Hyuga dearly loved her family. This statement was not exclusive to her husband and children, or even to just those members of the Hyuga clan who had been kind to her as a child. Family was family. Even the most distant relatives on her husband's side were as dear to her as siblings. Karen Hazuka ne Uzumaki was like a sister-in-law to Hinata, and she was as close to the woman as she was to her own sister. Karui Akamichi was practically a cousin. The daughter of Priestess Shion was like a niece. The Hyuga family tree was very closely knit, even for all of the bad blood between its branches. Hinata was accustomed through long use to reckoning even far-flung relations as kin, as the Hyuga clan, or how large as it was, kept among its own as often as not. The fact that her husband's clan had all but disintegrated and scattered to the four corners of the earth decades ago did not deter Hinata from warmly greeting even his most distantly removed relatives as family. She was a kind, warm-hearted, understanding sort of woman. Even though her childhood had not always been the happiest or most fortunate, she firmly believed in family before all else. This was why she could greet someone like the Hoshikage's Nisama, just because the man's mother had carried EU drops of Uzumaki blood within her veins. Hinata loved her family dearly. This statement did not exclude her father. Oh, he had been a hard man, a stern disciplinarian who would not hesitate to berate her for even the slightest mistakes while training. Hiyashi Hyuga had never been a terribly expressive individual, and had rarely shown any kind of recognizable affection to his children in their youth. A less forgiving woman than Hinata would not hesitate to begrudge the man his harsh training and critical attitude. But Hinata loved him all the same. Hiyashi was her father, and not a bad person. As a parent herself, she could now understand the anxiety and the worry, the fear of not being ready to raise a child. She had faced many of the pitfalls herself, been forced to overcome numerous tribulations as a her of two. Her father had never hated her. No, it had been a very long time indeed since Hinata had feared as much. He loved both of his daughters, and wanted only the best for them. As the head of a ninja clan, that meant doing everything he could to make his girls strong, to impart upon them resolve necessary to someday lead the family, and fighting ability to keep them alive. Hinata did not resent her father for calling her weak as a child, or for pushing her so hard to improve. Those words had hurt, of course, and the stress had driven her to withdraw further and further into hers. But she knew that he had been doing no different for her than his father had done for him and his brother. If anything, Hiyashi's methods had been lenient by the standards of traditional shinobi discipline. He had never struck her outside of a spar, or pushed her too far past her limits. He was not an outwardly affectionate man, but neither had he ever been abusive. When it had become seemingly clear to him that Hinata would likely never be able to completely discard her kind nature, or to overcome her hesitation and self-doubt, he had simply given up and turned his attentions to the more promising Hanabi. This may have dismayed Hinata when she was young, but the person she was now could understand his reasoning. She did not resent the man, or begrudge him that long-past dismissal of her potential. Hinata Uzumaki was a mature, grown woman. She had overcome those insecurities many years ago. She and her father had reconciled when she was still in her teens, and now she was 35 years old, a mother of two academy students. With a husband like Naruto Uzumaki, it was only natural that Hinata would have long since come to terms with her childhood. Although she was now in a 12-year-old body, back when her father's antipathy towards her had been at its peak, from Hinata's perspective she had been at peace with the man for almost 20 years. She loved her father dearly, and respected him as well. This did not mean, however, that she could not find amusement in his present fear of her. Honestly, the whole misunderstanding was actually pretty funny from her perspective. The look on his face when he saw her returning to the manor had nearly made Hinata break out in laughter. Even now, a quarter of an hour later, she could still feel one or two giggles escape her lips as she Tea about her father clinging to Dojo's outside wall like the ground had turned into lava. Hiyashi hadn't even looked that undignified at his 50th birthday party, when one of his older cousins had cracked out some less than flattering baby pictures of the retired clan head. Hey, hee SNRK. Kiba Inuzuka stared at his female teammate with an odd mixture of confusion and anxiety. Hinata's face was quite a deep shade of red, and her shoulders appeared to be spasming on and off. She looked rather like she was having trouble breathing, too, and was ching uncharacteristically at her ribs. You alright, Hinata? He ventured, looking uncertainly at the girl. Teehee. Ha ha ha. Why yes, I'm fine, hee. Kiba. Kun. Shino, from the other side of Hinata, looked askance at the girl. Possibly. He might have also been staring at their new Junin senseis behind. The sungles made it kind of hard to tell where his eyes were actually pointed. If I didn't know any better, I would say it almost sounds like she's laughing, the Aburame commented. Laughing. Kiba frowned, narrowing his eyes and looking more closely at Hinata's scarlet face and trembling Rame. Huh. Weird. Is that normal for her? He looked curiously at Shino, perhaps expecting the insect user to have a better insight into their female teammate's personality. Kiba had honestly never actually noticed either of them until yesterday, when they'd been stuck on a genin squad together. Those two were not the kind of people who stood out from the crowd. Shino might have frowned at Kiba's question. It was hard to tell. Not that I know of, he said. It seems to be quite uncharacteristic of her, actually. Quote. Kiba furrowed his brow. He scratched his head. So, he muttered. What? Has she snapped or something? For some unfathomable reason, Hinata's laughter seemed to redouble at this comment. Kiba stared at the girl, uncertain what to think. Akamaru rode on the boy's head, the small white pup eagerly wagging its tail. Hinata shook her head, red-faced and trembling. No, I'm sorry. She giggled a little more, tears in her eyes. It's nothing, Kiba-kun, Shino-kun. I just remembered a very funny joke. That's all. Shino seemed to accept this. Kiba ed an eyebrow suspiciously for a moment, before shrugging and letting it go. He could buy that. I see. Must be one hell of a joke, he commented, stretching boredly. Hinata's lips twitched. Oh, it is. It really is, she said. There was a twinkle of mirth in her eye. A moment of silence ped between the trio of genin, as they followed Kurenai to the mission center. Kiba watched the clouds go by, and Shino stared fixedly at a point a little ways in front of Hinata, who walked directly behind their new sensei. They walked down the street to their destination, the building rearing up ahead of them. Ninja of various ranks came to and fro around them as they drew near to the tower. Shino hummed thoughtfully. I wonder what kind of mission we'll be ignored. He spoke up, glancing around as they ped in through the door. Kiba let out a barking laugh, and grinned at his male teammate. They'll probably want us to infiltrate some kind of smuggling ring, he confidently declared. Oh, or maybe we'll be ignored to guard a princess. Quote. A beat. PFF'd. Hinata's face turned an impossible shade of maroon, and her cheeks puffed out. Wide-eyed and shaking, her mouth snapped open, a howling laughter escaping her lips. Ha 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 ha. Oh goodness. Ah ha 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 ha. Kiba and Shino both stared at Hinata. Quietly, they scooted a couple inches away, unsure how to take this newest hysterical fit. Kurenai, for her part, was glad that none of the three noticed her own trembling lip, or the tears in her eyes. She herself was only barely restraining her laughter. It took Hinata several seconds to calm down, and several ninja in the mission center, mostly those acquainted with Hyuga clan members, were giving her very wary looks. Shino and Kiba continued to stare uncomprehendingly at the girl. Well, okay, that was mostly Kiba. Shino was still keeping his eye on Kurenai-sensei, for the most part. The Chunin at the desk got a wicked gleam in his eye when Team 8 walked up to him. Ah, he said, glancing at the look of scarcely suppressed amusement on Kurenai's face, and the trio of fresh-looking genin behind her. Your first mission. Despite herself, Kurenai couldn't help mirroring the man's sadistic grin. Hinata was breathing slow and deep to keep herself from breaking down in giggles again. She felt most unusually giddy, and a part of her wondered if it might not have had something to do with the 12-year-old body she was currently inhabiting. Kiba and Shino were more concerned with the contents of the scroll the clerical nin handed their sensei. Even the fairly stoic Aburame looked a hair eager for their first official job as shinobi of the Hidden Leaf. Well, what's our mission, sensei? Kiba asked excitedly. Infiltration, I-Nation, bodyguard duty. Kurenai turned to face her students, an all too innocently sweet smile on her face. Babysitting, she told them, a trace of sadistic delight in her tone. Oh, she was going to relish this. If only she had a camera to preserve the looks on their faces for posterity. Kiba blinked. His face twisted in disbelief and confusion. He looked one part offended, one part irritated, and one part constipated. Even Shino seemed to wilt a fraction of inch. Hinata beamed, however, the only one of the three to not only look unperturbed by this announcement, but even appear to be downright pleased with their IGN meant. Oh, good, the girl warmly chirped. That should be fun. They ped. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the Lord Third Hokage, looked up from his calligraphy. Smoke curled from his pipe in thin wisps, the slender, finely crafted instrument shifting between the elderly shinobi's lips. Kakashi Hatake was standing just outside the threshold of Hiruzen's study, looking oddly pleased despite the ragged state of his uniform. The Sandaime was mildly surprised to note what looked like numerous claw marks in the Junin's flak vest, as well as a few larger rips and tears. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes thoughtfully, plucking his pipe from his mouth. He exhaled a puff of sweetly pungent smoke, frown lines subtly deepening. Did they, now? He murmured, voice low and raspy. I must admit, that is a pleasant surprise. Uruka seemed quite certain you would fail them. A strange expression flickered over Kakashi's face for the briefest instant. Less perceptive men wouldn't have even noticed it. Uruka? Huh, I think I remember him, Kakashi said, his visible eye marginally narrowing. Their academy instructor, right? Correct, Hiruzen said with a curt nod. I do believe you're the one who convinced him to make that particular career choice. Quote, was I? Now, Kakashi mused. Well, I don't remember it, but I suppose it could have happened. He shrugged. Honestly, though, if that guy was actually worried about those three failing my test. He trailed off. Hiruzen noticed a curious mixture of resentment and gratitude in the copy ninja's voice. I'll admit that their team combination is a potentially volatile one, he conceded, but clearly they managed to pull through spectacularly. Quote, Kakashi gave Hiruzen an eye smile. Oh, no, not just pull through, he said. He shook his head, looking almost torn between swelling pride and petty resentment. I dare say those three completely demolished me. I wasn't able to even lay a finger on them. The Sandaime blinked, and stared at Kakashi. After a moment's silence, he frowned. Quote, I beg your pardon, you heard me, Lord Hokage. They tore me into pieces and completely trivialized the bell test. I didn't even have to tie one of them to a log. Here, Kakashi paused. Not that I would have been able to unless they let me, I imagine. Hiruzen snuffed out his pipe, and he set it aside. Kakashi, he said slowly, giving the man a gimlet eye. Have you been indulging in any recreational habits I should be aware of? Maybe they aren't immediately poisonous, but there's still a reason that those mushrooms are labeled as highly toxic in the field manual. Quote. Kakashi shook his head. I hear you, Hokage-sama, he said sincerely. I have not been engaging in the use of any non-prescription opiates, narcotics, or psychotropic substances. Hiruzen's eyes were still narrowed. And yet you were unable to so much as lay a finger on three freshly graduated academy students. He drawled. The skepticism was dripping from his tone. Perhaps you need to be sent back for remedial lessons, yourself, Kakashi. Quote, Kakashi, again, shook his head. No, you wouldn't be saying that if you'd seen them in action, he insisted, a strange look in his eye. He glanced pointedly at the Lord Third's crystal ball. Hiruzen cleared his throat, inconspicuously dabbing a bit of blood away from his nostrils as he recalled a certain impromptu spar that had erupted between Anko and Yugao in the hot springs earlier that day. Yes, well, he muttered. They must have set up quite a good number of traps for you in the length of time it took for you to arrive, I do not doubt. He gave Kakashi a pointed look, silently reiterating a well-worn lecture on the distinction between tolerance and approval in regards to the man's customary cunctation. But Kakashi dismissed it with a wave of his hand. The only trap they've set on me since I met the three was that eraser Naruto dropped on my head the other day. I don't know what Iruka's been teaching those kids, but the only one of them whose abilities didn't completely baffle me was Naruto. Kakashi paused. Although I do wonder how a minor could come to have such an intimate knowledge regarding the Ika Ika series and its heroines. Hiruzen sighed, getting the impression that they were getting back into somewhat more familiar ground. I see, he muttered. So it was that harem jutsu of Naruto's that did you in. Kakashi's smile seemed especially genuine at this comment. The boy has a real talent, he said sincerely. The perverted giggle slipping from the man's mouth, and the visible pinkness in his cheek, only slig. HTLY ruined the effect of his words. Hiruzen once more dabbed at his nose, closing his eyes and trying not to think about the singularly well-endowed female love interests in his favorite student's most infamous series, all clad in nothing but thin wisps of smoke, and lewdly squirming and cooing. Gee, as they piled on top of him, and the Sandame's cheeks darkened noticeably. The tissue in his hand became stained with red. Yes, of course, he said distractedly, before weakly shaking his head and discarding the blood-drenched tissue. Well, yes, ahem. He cleared his throat. What about the other two, then? He inquired, trying to change the topic to something less likely to violently exsanguinate him with certain OCIATED mental images. Kakashi paused, frowning. Well, Sakura leveled a good portion of the forest surrounding the training grounds. She's like a freak mini Tsunade, he said with a barely repressed shudder. A moment later, he added, almost as an afterthought. Oh, and also Sasuke seems to have awakened some strange kind of Sharingan. The Lord Third blinked. A frown tugged at his lips. Define strange, Kakashi. It didn't have a Tomo pattern, Kakashi elaborated. It looked like, well, I don't know how I'd describe it. It was sort of like. He gestured vaguely. Do you know those Spiegel sort of toys? The ones with the dials and the twisting shapes that don't actually show what you're looking at. Quote. Kakashi scowled, visibly racking his brain for the word. It's, well, like, it looked sort of like that, or at least the pattern reminded me of something you might see in one of those, Quote. He tapped a finger on his wrist, fidgeting as he tried to recall the word. You know, it was like. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. He stroked his short beard. Quote. Like a kaleidoscope, he said, venturing a guess. Kakashi blinked. He snapped his fingers. Yes, that's the word. He said, nodding his head. Yes, it was like a kaleidoscope, except in only red and black. Do you know anything about that? Quote. The Sandame nodded. That does sound familiar, he said. The Lord Second, my mentor and predecessor, did extensive research into the Sharingan during the latter part of his life. I might have some of his old papers still lying around somewhere in my personal library. Quote. He gestured for Kakashi to leave, before pausing and getting a thoughtful look. Is there anything else you might need to tell me? Kakashi paused halfway out the door, a thoughtful expression on his face. Well, Sasuke's missing an arm, he commented. Says he fell down the stairs. Hiruzen blinked. Then he let out a sigh, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. How troublesome, the professor muttered. Yeah, tell me about it, Kakashi agreed. Somewhere in the village, Shikamaru Nara sneezed. Man, 12-year-old me was such a slob. Naruto looked around at his apartment, shaking his head. It was an absolute pigsty. Sasuke and Sakura stood behind the blonde, to either side. Both looked around at the apartment, really taking in the messy, filthy state of their friend and teammates' living quarters. Right, like you aren't still one, Sasuke drawled, rolling his eyes. He smirked at Naruto. The blonde scoffed in response, shooting a dark look back over his shoulder. Bah, what do you know? He grumbled. Sakura looked around appraising Ly. She and Sasuke had been in here earlier, of course, but she hadn't really taken the time to take a good look around until now. She gave a weak shrug, and a lopsided half-smile. I don't know, she murmured. I wouldn't say it's that bad. Naruto scratched the back of his neck, and he gave Sakura a sort of grateful look. You think so? He said. I mean, I know I was just a kid living on my own. Quote. Why yeah, it's not that bad, Sakura repeated, saying it with a touch less conviction. Sasuke snorted. I've seen landfills with less garbage, he scoffed, wrinkling his nose. Please tell me you plan on tidying up in here, Naruto. Quote. The blonde shrugged. Maybe if I have time, he said, waving a hand dismissively. But I was kinda busy sending out those letters, earlier. You know. Yes, unfortunately, Sasuke muttered. He grimaced at the sight of a half-empty cup ramen sitting amongst wrinkled, dirty tissues. Sakura frowned, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder. Now, dear, she said, her tone gently remonstrating. Be polite. That was as much your idea as Naruto's. I know, Sasuke sighed, rolling his eyes. Honestly, woman, between you and our honorable Lord Hokage, it's a wonder I've managed to stay sane all these years. That's umming an awful lot. Naruto guffawed, elbowing his friend in the ribs. Like you aren't already completely cracked. He waggled his eyebrows teasingly. Sasuke looked like he was an inch away from pouting. Bastard, he sniped, but there was no real heat behind the word. Sakura smiled indulgently, and wrapped an arm around Sasuke's waist. Naruto chuckled, and cleared away a spot on his couch. Garbage and old scrolls were heaped onto the coffee table, and one of the legs was propped up on a stack of ancient, yellowing newspapers. This place could really use a woman's touch, the Pinkett observed absent-mindedly. Maybe Hinata could help you tidy up. It's like the bachelor pad from hell, Sasuke agreed. Naruto shrugged, before letting himself plop down on the couch. I was a total slob as a kid, he conceded. But it's not like I'll be inviting people over for dinner parties, or anything. A sock chose that moment to wriggle its way out from under a stack of ramen cups. Stale and crusty, more brown than white, the article of clothing started crawling off the coffee table. Gurgling hideously, the vile thing flopped onto the floor with an audible grunt. Naruto pinned it down with a lazily flung kunai, not even looking in the sock's direction as he continued chatting with his teammates. Sasuke and Sakura spared a mildly disturbed glance toward the still writhing garment. The blood-curdling screams were rather disconcerting. Naruto, Sasuke said, looking slightly sick. Please, clean your damn apartment. Quote. Sakura nodded weakly in agreement. Why yeah, I think we'd all rather avoid a repeat of the boxer shorts rebellion, she concurred. Or the curdled milk revolt, Sasuke added, his eyes glinting with something like amusement. Sakura smiled crookedly. Oh, yes, she said. And of course, who can forget the moldy toast nation plot? Heavens forbid we have another stalking strike, Sasuke said seriously. Or a mutant roach insurgence, Sakura spoke. That was horrible, Sasuke said with a shudder. Don't even remind me. He made a face. Sakura nodded sagely, and gave him a roaring pat on the shoulder. Don't worry, hun. I'm sure we'll be able to cut it off before it starts, she said. If it looks like the roaches are about to achieve sentience and immolate the power of chakra from Naruto's garbage. The seventh Hokage made a very rude gesture. Holes, Naruto grumbled, sounding distinctly petulant. I am so igning you each a month of D ranks when we get back home. Sasuke and Sakura smiled, and whistled innocently. Oh, you are hereby cordially invited to an Uzumaki family reunion in the Hidden Leaf Village. As a surviving descendant of the Uzumaki clan, your presence at this event would be greatly appreciated. There will be refreshments, of course, and plenty of festivities. The date has not yet been set, but please RSVP as soon as possible. A second letter will be sent to you when we have finalized the arrangements. Please send your reply to the following address. Karen blinked. She turned the scroll over in her hands several times. A recently acquired Kusagaker forehead protector was lying across her lap. She frowned, glancing nervously at her teammates. The two older genins seemed unconcerned with the young redhead, busy amusing themselves by poking and prodding at the messily eviscerated corpse of the delivery ninja Hoo-ha. Dee brought her this message. With only a very faint grimace, Karen turned and started fishing through her things for a brush and scroll. She was curious, to be honest. And who knew? Maybe she'd actually meet a cute guy over there. Karen blushed at the thought, and let out the slightest perverted giggle. Karui of Kumogakure took one look at the contents of her letter, before swearing loudly and vehemently. 1/4. She snapped at the parchment in her hand. 1 measly quarter. Omoi and Samui watched their teammate curse at the scroll with expressions of mild worry. Is this about that whole Uzumaki thing? The former wondered. Must be, Samui replied blandly. What else would she be shouting? 1/4, 1/4. Over. Huh. I wonder what's in that letter, then. Omoi murmured. If it's got Karui in such a tizzy. Samui eyed their red-headed teammate, who angrily spared one last glare for the scroll in her hand, before tossing it over her shoulder. Omoi didn't quite manage to duck in time, and he fell backwards over the black and blue form of the unfortunate delivery ninja. Hinoka Uzumaki nodded politely to the delivery ninja, smiling as she absent-mindedly restrained one of the more temperamental test subjects with a relatively basic A-rank sealing jutsu. She glanced down at the scroll the courier had paid off to her. It looked to be a message of some sort, and the wax seal was unbroken. There was a mild fuinjutsu bound to it, one she expected would only open for a specific criteria. Casually pricking her thumb, Hinoka dripped a bit of her blood onto the wax seal, which promptly glowed for a second, before melting away into nothing. Unfurling the scroll, she began to read. The contents of the letter surprised her, and she barely even noticed when one of her employers, Mos. T's recent attempts at creating the ultimate summon beast broke free from its restraints just long enough to snap up the departing courier ninja in its jaws. Humming thoughtfully, Hinoka started looking for her writing supplies. Conan stood silent and expressionless beside the diva path of her lord and comrade. He held a scroll in his hand, one which she had already checked quite thoroughly for traps. Pain read the message contained within. His face was unreadable. Several long minutes of silence ped between them. Is this some manner of joke? He muttered at last, lowering the scroll. He glared sternly at the delivery ninja. Despite the fact that he was being suspended in midair well over a dozen stories from the closely packed streets below, tightly wrapped in a cocoon of explosive notes, the messenger seemed quite unfazed as he politely shook his head. Payne scowled, and stowed the letter away in the depths of his cloak. Dispose of him, Conan, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. His angel dutifully nodded, and moments later the citizens of Omegakure found themselves cheering on an impromptu fireworks display. You are hereby cordially invited to an Uchiha family reunion in the Hidden Leaf Village. As a surviving descendant of the Uchiha clan, or unrelated bearer of the Sharingan, your presence at this event would be greatly appreciated. There will be refreshments, of course, and plenty of festivities. The date has not yet been set, but please RSVP as soon as possible. A second letter will be sent to you when we have finalized the arrangements. Please send your reply to the following address. Kakashi blinked, nearly running straight into the delivery ninja who had been standing outside the Sandame's office. He intelligently said, still a bit distracted from the talk he'd just had with the Hokage. A letter for Kakashi Hatake, the courier said, the very picture of professionalism. He presented a scroll from the depths of his mail pouch, and Kakashi accepted it with an owlish blink. The copy ninja dismissed the messenger with a bored wave of his hand, ignoring the slightly put-off look on the man's face, and cracked the scroll open as he made his way out of the tower. Taking note of the Uchiha clan seal in the wax, Kakashi flicked his eye over the letter's contents. It looked like complete gibberish. Without missing a beat, he uncovered his Sharingan. Ah, a family reunion, he drawled skeptically, seeing that he could now read the letter. A moment ped, and he shrugged. Well, I suppose it could be good therapy for the kid. Danzo stood secure and cautious behind a high-level barrier jutsu as one of his more disposable agents tested the scroll for traps. A delivery ninja stood off to one side, bound in straps and drooling a little as a mind jutsu expert scoured the man's brain for any and all intelligence on the foundation. Danzo waited patiently as his agent slowly and carefully broke the seal on the scroll. He leaned on his cane, a stony expression on his face. Well, he rasped, his voice coming out more like a growl than anything else. It appears to be encrypted, the agent replied blandly, toneless. Judging by the pattern, I'd say it's probably meant to be read with some manner of dujutsu. Danzo scowled, and after a moment's thought beckoned for the scroll to be brought over to him. Lowering the barrier and uncovering the Sharingan he had quote-unquote acquired from Shisui Uchiha, the head of the foundation irritably snatched the letter out of his soldier's hand. If it were possible, his expression became even stonier when he actually read it. Itachi Uchiha hummed thoughtfully as he read the letter in his hands. His brow was subtly furrowed, and a flicker of some unreadable emotion ped over his face. Foolish little brother, he murmured. Have you forgotten already? Kisame glanced curiously at his partner, who was staring holes into that illegible mess of text on the scroll the delivery ninja had handed him. Is it anything important, Itachi-san? He inquired politely. Maybe, Itachi answered, sounding pensive. It seems I have been invited to a family reunion. Kisame quirked an eyebrow at this. I thought you killed all your family, he quipped. Itachi shrugged in silent reply, and handed a modest roll of bills to the courier Nin, who bowed gratefully before departing. Toba's eye twitched. He looked from the scroll in his hands to the violently dismembered remains of the delivery ninja who'd had the gall to address him by that name, which he had discarded so many years ago. He looked back down at the letter, which was addressed to one Obito Uchiha. Had he possessed an eye with the Enten affinity, the sheer force of his glare would have already combusted the poor scroll into tongues of pitch-black flame. He looked back at the delivery ninja, whom he had so brutally torn apart upon the first mention of that hated name. He felt a heat in his chest, and a pressure behind his eyes. His gut roiled furiously, filled with bile and wrath. Lifting his mask, Toby spat fire at the mutilated corpse. Then, for good measure, he undid the zipper on his trousers and emptied his bladder on the ashes. The letter itself he tore into a number of very tiny pieces. Welcome home, dear. How was your mission? This was the first thing Naruto heard upon ping the Chunin Gate guards. It was a fine, sunny day that saw Team 7's return from their first official C rank, and Hinata smiled cheerfully as her beloved walked back into the village. The mission went about as well as you could expect, Naruto said with a shrug. It turned into an A- rank before we were even a day's walk from the village, of course. You know how that kind of thing goes. Quote. Hinata nodded, and fell in step alongside Naruto as the blonde and his team made their way into the village. Sasuke and Sakura nodded at the girl in acknowledgement, politely greeting her with a wave or a smile. Kakashi didn't outwardly respond to Hinata's presence. He had his nose buried in a careworn copy of Ika Ika Paradise, and probably wouldn't have noticed it if the entire village burst into flames all around him. Naruto smiled at the girl, though, an easy grin quirking his lips. Hinata returned the smile in her own demure fashion, quietly confident in her poise and expression. I see, she said thoughtfully. Are you okay? M'alright, Naruto answered, uaging her concern with a wave of his hand. Wasn't anything we couldn't handle. That's good, Hinata commented. I'd hate to see you or your teammates injured on your first real mission. Quote. Naruto gave her a sly grin, and puffed out his chest. Nonsense, Hinata-chan. Every mission we take is important to the village. No matter what a job might be ranked as, it is imperative that we take it seriously. To do anything less would be an insult to our pride as shinobi, and to the trust of the Hokage. Hinata giggled, and patted him on the shoulder. Yes, dear, of course, dear, she said, responding in an absent-minded, smile and nod sort of fashion. Whatever you say. Naruto repaid this comment with a blink and you miss it peck on the cheek, and a similarly quick pat on the rear. You know what I mean, sweetie, he spoke, winking cheerfully. Every little bit counts, and the village depends on the revenue we bring in with our missions. Quote. Hinata giggled, and retaliated by snatching her husband's hand and twining their fingers tightly together. You tease, she said, her eyes glinting with amusement. She winked at him. Don't start something you can't finish. Quote. Naruto pouted. Even if I still can't do it reliably, he muttered, before shaking his head. Well, that's beside the point. I've got good news. Hinata delicately arched a slim, lavender eyebrow. Oh, and what would that be? She inquired carefully. The mission was a success. The way he said mission made it clear to her that he meant something quite apart from any job sanctioned by the Honorable Sandame. She smiled cautiously, an unreadable expression flitting momentarily across her face. Ah, she murmured. That's good. Inari and the other villagers stared, slack-jawed, at the sight of Gato's very few remaining men turning tail to flee. The vast majority of the mercenaries were laid out cold at the far end of the bridge, looking surprisingly unharmed despite their present state of unconsciousness. The young wave native who had done his darndest to rally his dispirited countrymen weakly lowered his crossbow, blinking owlishly. Kakashi and Zabuza looked pretty beat up. The latter appeared quite sheepish as someone who was either a very pretty girl or an extremely pretty boy tended to an ointment of minor injuries. Sakura herself had a pair of shadow clones attending to her Junin-sensei, and the third one of her was healing some pretty gnarly stab wounds on the Kiri swordsman's arms. Sasuke waved to Inari in languid greeting with his one arm, the ground around him littered with a veritable haystack of gleaming acupuncture needles, as well as a very large puddle. The older boy didn't look like he had a single scratch on him, or even one hair out of place. And at the far end of the bridge, where the few conscious mercenaries left were flinging themselves over the edge to escape retribution at the hands of the ramshackle wave militia, a seemingly unfazed Yuto was patting a distraught and sobbing Gato on the shoulder. Notably, the tyrannical businessman's nose was bent at an odd angle, and he looked to have the makings of a nasty shiner around one eye. There, the blonde was saying, speaking in a soothing tone. We all make mistakes. But the important thing is knowing when to admit you've done wrong. I just wanted you to love me, Papa. The ruthless shipping magnate wailed. I never meant to hurt all those people. He buried his face in his hands, a very loud and miserable sounding sob tearing from his throat. Inari, and the several score of concerned wave citizens backing him up, blinked in unison. The effect was somewhere between comical and creepy. You could actually hear their eyelids sorta wetly clapping shut, before sliding back apart in perfect synchronization. The hell did we miss? Inari gaped. Hinata met Naruto's eye, and he nodded seriously. She smiled, tilting her head in silent acknowledgement of the unspoken message. He squeezed her hand, and leaned in for another quick and silent ninja kiss. A slightest pink flush worked its way up from the nape of Hinata's neck, her cheeks subtly coloring. Her smile became playfully lopsided, and she gently shoved her husband. Ha ha ha. Naruto laughed, bright and sunny. It is. Kakashi looked up from his book to eye the pair a hint curiously. He shook his head, sighing in what sounded like amused exasperation. Man, kids these days, he muttered to himself. Hard to believe they're already pairing off. There was a touch of something nostalgic in the man's tone, a whisper of happy recollection untainted by the bitterer memories of bloodshed and tears. He glanced from Naruto and Hinata, who seemed to be competing to see who could express their affectee. Ons the most stealthily as they walked down Main Street, to Sasuke and Sakura, who sounded like they were in the middle of bickering like an old married couple. Honestly, sweetie, just admit you thought he was cute, already, the Pinkett said to the last loyal Uchiha, a twinkle of something cack. Ashi would rather not psychoanalyze in her eyes. I did not, Sasuke retorted stubbornly, hand tucked peevishly into his pocket. He was slouching and scowling, a slight scowl on his face. How many times do I have to tell you I'm not into that kind of thing? Quote. Sakura giggled and gave him a pat on the back. Now, she sing-songed. It's nothing to be ashamed of. He wore that yukata very well, after all. Sasuke's cheeks reddened, and he looked away from Sakura. Sure. Okay. Yeah, he muttered peevishly. It did look good on him, I'll admit that much. If he'd been a girl, I might have even thought he was cute. He gave Sakura a sharp look. But he wasn't. So I didn't. Quote. Whatever you have to tell yourself, Sakura said, smirking wryly. Personally, I'd say he was absolutely adorable. You and your Shutokan, Sasuke huffed. Honestly, woman. Sakura rolled her eyes. Prude. She teased, blowing a raspberry. Then she winked. Or maybe I should say hypocrite, she added, smirking. 'Cause I'm pretty sure I saw you checking out Tsunami Sands. That's completely different, Sasuke cut in, speaking remarkably loftily. Briefly shooting a glance at Kakashi, he lowered his voice to say, she's much closer to our actual age, for one thing. Sakura snorted. And the fact that you and I are an item isn't enough to convince you not to stare at her. She jibed, though there was no actual heat in her words. Oh, please. Like it kept you from eyeing Zabuza's package, Sasuke retorted, rolling his eyes. Sakura shrugged. What can I say? She replied. I have a thing for younger men. He's not what I'd call handsome, though, Sasuke said. Or are you into that whole, no eyebrows thing? And what would you call handsome? Sakura teased, latching onto the first part of his statement. Honey. Sasuke blushed. It wasn't immediately obvious, but it was there. He coughed, clearing his throat. Quote. Haku, he conceded, seeing that his wife had brought their topic full circle. Quickly, face reddening further, he added, you know, since most girls seem to like their men to be the more effeminate side. He is a total bishi, Sakura conceded, nodding sagely. Though I'd say I've mostly outgrown that phase. Plus his face is just a bit too girly for my tastes. She winked at Sasuke, and grabbed his hand. No way in hell is that a man, Sasuke hissed to Naruto, watching Haku leave the clearing. Men do not shake their hips like that. Clearly you've never seen Sai at a dance club, Naruto drawled, watching Haku go. Besides, which of us apprenticed under the biggest straight pervert in the elemental nations? I know a woman when I see one. Haku is not a man, Sasuke insisted vehemently. She's obviously just a very flat-chested girl. Quote. Naruto rolled his eyes. Keep telling yourself that, bud. If you want to believe that Haku is just a petenko who likes to go around lying about her gender. She is, Sasuke spoke, a steely look in his eyes. And if you so much as breathe a whisper to the contrary, I will punch you so hard. Naruto snorted, a smirk tilting his lips. Whatever helps you sleep at night, he chirped. Then he waggled his eyebrows. But in all seriousness, Haku does have a very nice. Yeah, fair enough, Sasuke conceded, a faint flush to his cheeks. That never happened, Naruto, Sasuke ground out, glaring at the blonde. Naruto smirked mischievously. Maybe, he said evasively. But you can't definitively prove a negative statement, so there's always a chance that you actually were ogling Haku's butt. Sasuke glared. His face was red as a beet. Sakura giggled, amusedly side-eyeing her husband. Hinata smiled, her eyes twinkling with interest. Kakashi turned a page in his Ika. I hate you so much right now, Sasuke muttered darkly. Naruto laughed, waving a hand dismissively. Sure, whatever you say, he said. I don't think there's anything wrong with you appreciating certain parts of this Haku-san's anatomy, Hinata added comfortingly, patting Sasuke on the shoulder of his missing arm. Sakura nodded eagerly. And if you decided to appreciate them in a more hands-on manner, she added with a playful wink, preferably while I'm watching. The pinkett waggled her eyebrows suggestively. Sasuke grimaced at this, and looked dearly like he wanted to continue defending his heteroality. Instead, after a moment of visible indecision, he spat out an exceptionally vehement curse against Naruto, Haku, and the whole damn world in general. Kakashi turned another page in his Ika. Tsunade was not having the best day. Or week. Or month. In fact, pretty much the whole past several years had just been one big mess. Aside from the gambling losses, and MIV debts, and sleepless nights filled with dreams of blood and Feilu. She also had to deal with people coming to her and asking for her services. And not those kinds of services, mind you, she was called the legendary sucker solely for the fact that she never knew when to quit, when it came to gambling. But she was also a legendary medic, almost universally considered to be the best healer in the world. So there were lots of people who wanted her to take a look at their sickly or injured loved ones. And for the most part, these were the otherwise hopeless cases who had nothing left to lose, the sort of people who thought, well, if Tsunade can't do it, no one can. This wouldn't be so bad, of course, if the only folk requesting her aid were wealthy, affluent types who could pay handsomely for her trouble. Sure, there was that crippling hemophobia she had to work around, but that's what she had Shizune for. But unfortunately, a disproportionate number of the people who sought Tsunade out were desperate charity cases. And it never failed to make her feel like a total heel when she turned those sorts away, but she also knew that she couldn't just go around treating people for free. She needed every red cent just to scrape by from one day to the next. She wouldn't dirty her hands for free. She couldn't afford to. And yet, she would do 100 pro bono jobs in a heartbeat, if only it meant never having to go back to the leaf again. Even after all these years, her sensei refused to give up on trying to convince her to return. Tsunade let out an exasperated sigh, leaning against a good-sized boulder as she stared up at the clouds. Fluffy, meandering drifts of water vapor, white cotton wisps floating across a blue backdrop. Her eyes, brown and weary, flicked side to side as she stared listlessly at the sky. That one looks like a toad. She gazed at a particularly lumpy cumulus, trailing banks like outstretched legs behind it. The resemblance was faint, and academically Tsunade understood that it was just a quirk of the brain's image visual recognition processes, that the cloud didn't really bear objective similarity to any sort of amphibian. Yet, all the same, her thoughts turned unbidden to Jiraiya, whom she had both consciously and unconsciously associated with toads for nearly as long as she'd known the man. Tsunade felt a weight in her chest, and her eyelids seemed painfully heavy. She stared silently at the sky, feeling unusually introspective. Normally she would be gambling at this time of day, or traveling from one town to another, or even doing some kind of favor for one of her debtors to make them let up a bit of the pressure. But the nearest town was still a few days away, and no one was hounding her for money at the moment. And besides that, Shizune wasn't looking all that good today. It was that time of the month for the younger woman, and even with her level of medical ninjutsu there was only so much that could be one without access to certain herbs or pharmaceuticals. And Tsunade had lost even more money at the last town than usual, so much so that they'd been forced to choose between food or medicine. Shizune was a real trooper, of course, and would have gladly soldiered on through the discomfort, but Nade felt sympathetic to the girl, and even if Shizune was a mature woman and Junin level kunoichi much closer in age to 30 than 13, she would probably always think of her as a girl, and had suggested they take a break. Although she didn't show it outright, Tsunade could tell that Shizune was grateful. They were resting a short ways off the road, now, maybe 3 or so yards. Tsunade was reclining against a small boulder, and the girl who could have been her niece was down by the stream, splashing her face with cool water. Judging by the position of the sun overhead, and the length of time for which they'd been walking, it was probably late noon. Maybe around 1 or 2 o'clock. Tsunade glanced towards her apprentice and traveling companion, who was gently coaxing Taunton to take a drink while they were stopped. It wasn't a particularly large stream, just 4 feet across and maybe 2.5 foot deep, but nonetheless the diminutive pig looked distinctly mistrustful of the burbling water. As Shizune continued patting and urging her pet, summoned to take a sip, Tsunade looked down in her lap, shifting against the rock and feeling the scroll in her coat pocket. It pressed into her side, and she felt a twinge of ill humor at the reminder of its presence. She scowled. You are hereby cordially invited to an Uzumaki family reunion in the Hidden Leaf Village. As a surviving descendant of the Uzumaki clan, your presence at this event would be greatly appreciated. The letter's contents replayed themselves through her mind, like the words of a particularly pushy salesman who lacked the good sense to take no for an answer. Uzumaki. That's rich, Tsunade muttered darkly, wondering ruefully if she didn't still have a half-full bottle of sake somewhere amongst her possessions. Please. Like I'd ever actually fall for such a transparent ploy. She shook her head, staring blearily at the GR between her legs. You'll need to do a hell of a lot better than that if you want to lure me back to the village, Sarutobi-sensei. Down by the stream, Shizune let out a startled yelp as a testy, mulish Taunton splashed her clothes with a considerable volume of rather chilly water. No. Bad Taunton. The woman squeaked. Bad. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose. I need a blasted drink, she sighed. Kiba ducked out of sight when he saw Team 7 approaching with Hinata in tow. He gently wrapped a hand around Akamaru's muzzle, silently hushing the pup. Concealed behind a pile of crates, the Inuzuka cautiously peeked out from a gap between the boxes. His eyes were narrowed, and his lips described a perplexed frown. He stared suspiciously at Naruto, who was holding Hinata's hand, chatting and smiling with the girl like he didn't have a care in the world. Kiba fought the urge to growl. Shino had said he was being ridiculous to get so worked up over Hinata hanging out with the members of another team. Kiba, in frustrated retaliation, had snapped, "Your face is ridiculous." It only took Kurenai-sensei a few seconds to pull her two male genin off of each other, but the lecture she'd then given them about maturity and cooperation and all that crap ate up nearly half an hour of their training time. This left both boys very irked indeed. And in Kiba's opinion, Naruto and his teammates were obviously the ones to blame for that. After all, if it weren't for how odd Naruto and Sasuke had been acting recently, he wouldn't have felt the need to get so worked up over how much time Hinata was spending with them in between training and missions. And if he wasn't so obsessive about figuring out what the hell was up with Team 7, he wouldn't have been getting on Shino's nerves with his fidgeting and muttered suspicions. So, yeah, as far as he was concerned, that whole lecture was all Naruto's fault. Sasuke's, too. He gave Sakura AP because she was a girl, and he didn't know her all that well from the academy anyways, so he wasn't actually sure how much of her behavior recently could actually be considered unusual. Kiba glared at Naruto from behind what he thought was perfect cover. And in all fairness, it was pretty good stealth for a ninja as inexperienced as himself. Sneaky enough to fool most other rookie genin without any problem. Of course, none of those 5 were rookie anything. Kakashi could smell the boy, and hear him crouching behind the boxes. Sasuke and Sakura detected him instinctively, getting the gut feeling that someone was watching them, and quickly deducing who it was and where they were hidden. Hinata, although her Dujutsu was not properly active, still had very sharp sight. She'd spotted Kiba before he even saw them coming. And Naruto, as a sensory-type ninja whose skills were beyond even being called cage level, was aware of every single person in the village. Kiba might as well have been standing 3 inches from the blonde's face, for all the good his hiding spot did him. So all 5 members of this group were in fact perfectly conscious of Kiba spying on them. Kakashi noticed that his students, and Hinata noticed, and each of the 4 reluctant time travelers were intuitively aware of the other's awareness. Naruto, not sensing any malice greater than a mild curiosity with the tiniest dash of petty envy, gave Sasuke a look that told the Uchiha to stand down right as he was considering whether to call out their apparent stalker. Sasuke scowled infinitesimally at this, but then gave a dismissive half-shrug. Sakura smiled, meeting Sasuke's eyes, and nodded in unspoken understanding. Hinata clasped Naruto's hand, squeezing it gently. Kakashi pondered what to do for dinner. Kiba, being only an inexperienced rookie genin, albeit a reasonably talented one, did not realize that he'd been spotted. Thus, he continued to tail Team 7, plus Hinata, for several more minutes. They went on up the street, and Kiba slipped stealthily out from behind the crates, skulking along after them. He scurried from one cover to the next, zigzagging across the road, zipping behind street lamps and stalls. Kakashi parted ways with his team after 2 more blocks, waving distractedly to Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura, and telling them to take the rest of the week off. From what Kiba could gather, apparently their last mission had been a higher rank than expected, and there was a lot of paperwork Kakashi would need to go through before his genin could take another job. I don't see what the big deal is. Sasuke's voice drifted down to Kiba, the Inuzuka listening raptly to Team 7's conversation. Quote. It was just an A- rank, after all, and not even a particularly difficult one. Kiba shared a perplexed look with Akamaru at this statement. An A rank? Nah, that couldn't be. Sasuke was probably just taking the mickey. Sure, the Uchiha hadn't exactly been known for his sense of humor back in the academy, but Kiba had noticed through his reconnaissance, "Shut up, Shino, it's not stalking." That Sasuke had, after graduation, apparently cultivated a certain dry, sarcastic wit. So this was probably some kind of weird, team-in joke. Kiba's thoughts were then interrupted by a snatch of speech from Sakura. Yeah, sensei, not a single scratch between the 3 of us. Maybe next time. Actual challenge. Akamaru fidgeted next to Kiba. Team 7 was moving outside their range of hearing. Kiba nodded, and darted up across the street. He ducked behind a barrel not 3 feet behind Kakashi, and was once more close enough to hear what his marks were. Ying. The paperwork will take a while, regardless. You sure you don't want our help with the mission report, Kaka-sensei? More hands make for lighter burdens, after all. But too many cooks spoil the broth, Naruto. Kakashi-sensei has already offered to do that for us. Right. And besides, I doubt Kakashi would trust us anywhere near a mission report form after that Tora fiasco. Naruto sighed, and shook his head. He, Sakura, Sasuke, and Hinata came to a stop while Kakashi continued onward. Team 7's Junin-sensei did not tarry, and was soon well out of sight. It was an honest accident, the blonde said, looking mildly peevish. Really? Just because the old man wound up having to redact like 3/4 of the report when he finally sent that copy over to Anbu Archives. Sakura rolled her eyes. It was a D-rank mission, Naruto. How you managed to get the details of the report classified as an S-rank secret is beyond me. Hinata let out a giggle. Ah, yes, I remember hearing about that. It's what caused that recent diplomatic incident with Cloud, right? Quote. Kiba blinked, not sure how to take this remark. Sasuke, in contrast, snorted and rolled his eyes. You should have known better than to try and borrow chakra from the knee. Yugito ni-san, correct? Hinata interjected, shooting Sasuke an oddly stern look. Yes, she was with the delegation that came to the village. I overheard as much from father. A strange expression flickered across Sasuke's face. He gave a start, before reddening and nodding. Yeah, right, that's what I meant. Somehow or other, Kiba got the opposite impression, but honestly, he couldn't make heads or tails of what they were saying. The individual words made sense, but something about the way they were being strung together simply refused to parse. Sasuke gave Naruto an odd look, after saying this, and the blonde scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. Haha, to be fair, I'd thought Tora might react better to a more feline chakra. But clearly you were mistaken, Sakura commented. She smirked. Naruto blushed. Right. Yeah, fair enough. He gave a shrug. And, honestly, it had completely slipped my mind that Yugito would still. It was a pain in the trying to explain that whole mess to the Lord Third, Sasuke sighed, shaking his head. I don't think he even bought our explanation. Hinata smiled. What was it, again? She mused, a twinkle in her eye. I do recall that Naruto told me, but the exact details seem to have slipped my mind. Quote. Sakura gave Hinata a curious look. There was something Kiba couldn't read in the Pinket's eyes, and for the briefest moment he thought he saw her glancing toward his hiding spot. But the next moment she was looking back at Hinata, and didn't seem to give any noticeable sign that she had seen him. Kiba let out a relieved sigh. He didn't catch what Sakura said next, though. She lowered her voice and leaned in toward Hinata, cupping a hand over her mouth to stymie any would-be lip readers. Whatever Sakura said, though, it must have been very amusing, because Hinata suddenly let out a clear and mirthful laugh. Oh my, you don't say, she tittered, pearlescent eyes merrily twinkling. Oh, my, quote. She shook her head, smiling playfully at Naruto. The blonde blushed when Hinata's gaze fell on him, and he scratched the back of his neck. What can I say? He mumbled, sounding a touch sheepish. I was grasping at straws with that one, just thankful Yugito-chan didn't bother to contradict me. Sasuke smirked. I dare say she wouldn't have been able, whether she wanted to or not, he drawled. His eyes gleamed. What with how hard she was laughing. Naruto responded with a mildly rude gesture. Oh, shove off, he sniped. Or should I tell Sakura about those magazines you had me hide for you the other day? Question mark quote. Sasuke went red in the face. I told you, he grumbled. They weren't mine. I found them in a box of Itachi's old things. Naruto smirked. Oh ho ho, he drawled, grinning like the cat that caught the canary. So you and Obito weren't the only Uchiha to have a nurse fetish. Sasuke's eye twitched, and he leaned into his something Kiba couldn't quite catch. All he was able to make out were, just because, something, medic ninja, and something, doesn't even count, anyways. Quote. Hinata smiled knowingly at this, and glanced sidelong at Naruto, who mirrored her expression. Are you sure, Sasuke? Said the Hyuga heiress. Because I seem to recall hearing about a certain anniversary dinner. Quote. Sasuke's face went redder than any tomato, and he immediately wheeled on Sakura with an expression on his face that Kiba might have described as something almost like betrayal. You told Hinata! Exclamation mark quote. He yelped. Sakura shook her head, smiling softly. Don't look at me, dear, she told him. I wasn't the one who blabbed. Sasuke frowned. He seemed to calm down marginally at this, though he still looked a touch mortified. Was it Shizune? He muttered. Hana, Sakura said. After it was over, I guess she was really drunk, and went off and blabbed too. Once again, it seemed for a split second like Sakura was looking straight at Kiba. But then her eyes were back on Sasuke, and she was talking like she hadn't seen anything. Kiba wondered slightly at this comment about his sister getting drunk. Hana wasn't actually of age yet, and she usually seemed to be very stringent about following the rules. He spent a few seconds mentally debating whether to file this remark away as potential blackmail material on his big sis. He also wondered what his older sister would know about Sasuke and Sakura, but shrugged it off a moment later as something he didn't particularly care about. Well, I'm sure you can guess who, Sakura finished. Sasuke scowled, implying that, yes, he could guess who. Remind to kick that bastards the next time we see him, he muttered. Onyx's eyes flashed. Sakura smiled indulgently, and nodded her head. Sure, whatever you say, dear. She patted him on the shoulder. Kabuto Yakushi frowned as he looked over the most recent intelligence he'd gathered within the village. Coded documents written in a cipher that only 3 people alive could read appeared on his desk in a puff of smoke, called up from within a small black storage scroll. His bedroom was nothing special. It was not especially tidy, but not quite messy, either. It was a small, cozy affair in a cheap, modest flat. Perfectly ordinary and unremarkable. Nothing that would lead someone to suspect its tenant as being anything unusual. Kabuto's desk lamp shined a sickly yellow light over his coded documents. Papers rustled as he shuffled them, flipping through the intelligence reports. Kabuto was a firm believer in checking his work. Dark eyes swiveled left and right, skimming the contents of the documents he had compiled over the last few weeks. Kabuto was a very good spy, and rarely ever let something escape his attention. There was no such thing as a superfluous detail in his opinion. Even if it didn't seem immediately important, you could never know when an apparently small matter might wind up proving paramount. It had already been decided that he would meet up with one of Lord Orochimaru's agents during his next mission outside the village. Tentative plans had been drawn up for infiltrating Konoha during the next Chunin exams, and while there was nothing concrete yet, it was nonetheless crucial that Kabuto gather as much information as possible. Scientia Potentia Est. That was Orochimaru's motto, and Kabuto believed in it strongly. The intelligence he would be ping along to the hidden sound was worth his weight in gold, and it would be inexcusably remiss of him to hand along anything faulty or suspect. Knowledge was power, and power corrupted. And Kabuto was one of the best damn spies alive. He knew better than to trust anyone completely. Even Orochimaru. Especially Orochimaru. Glancing again at a paper which described a private meeting between the Sandaime Hokage and Kakashi Hatake, the Ran script of a conversation regarding one young Sasuke's apparent activation of the rare and potent Mangekyo Sharingan, Kabuto hummed thoughtfully. The glare from his lamp's light rendered the young man's spectacles nearly opaque from the right angle. The corner of his lip twitched up in something distantly like a smirk. Separating this paper from the others, Kabuto crumpled it up and tossed it into his waste basket. Fractions of a second later, he deftly and disinterestedly smothered the resultant fire with a flame-retardant blanket. He then glanced at a closely related form, one which contained an encoded copy of a certain medical report regarding young Sasuke and his missing arm. It took only a moment for the spy to decide his next course of action. Grabbing his pen, Kabuto added a few notes to subtly emphasize the possible ramifications of Sasuke's dismemberment, particularly in regards to his combat ability, and certain top-secret plans that Orochimaru had been devising for the lad. Then he flicked through a few more papers, coming eventually to a report on the so-called Hinata Massacre. The Hyuga clan had hushed the incident up pretty quickly, but not before Kabuto had learned everything he needed to know. With a flourish of his pen, Kabuto added a few notes on the Byakugan's potential usefulness, inconspicuously commenting on the apparent level of skill which young Hinata had demonstrated. He then smiled to himself, capping his pen after a few minutes of writing, and nodded in satisfaction with high S work. Setting that aside, Kabuto proceeded to check the rest of his reports. It would not do to send Orochimaru-sama any faulty or misleading intelligence, after all. Can you believe that girl? Ino hissed, seething in her usual seat at Yakiniku-Q. Choji sat next to the platinum blonde, inhaling deeply as their meat cooked on the grill. He smiled at his female teammate, and gave her a good-natured chuckle. That depends, he said. Who are you talking about? Shikamaru sighed, seated opposite his best friend. Come on, Choji, I'm sure there's only one girl she'd be talking about like that, he grumbled, glancing wistfully out the window. It's Sakura, right? Ino glared. She's been getting far too cozy with Sasuke-kun, the Yamanaka heiress muttered, her eyes flashing. She ground her teeth. That human billboard, if she thinks that being on the same team is an excuse for them to act all lovey-dovey. Exclamation mark quote. Choji arched one of his eyebrows at this statement. Love-dovey, he said, side-eyeing Ino. Are we talking about the same Sakura, here? I've seen him around the village a couple times, you know. She and Sasuke aren't exactly what I'd call mushy or ooey-gooey. Half the time I see them, those two are practically at each other's throats, Shikamaru concurred. Hardly a starstruck romance, if you ask me. Quote. Ino rolled her eyes. Boys, she muttered in apparent exasperation. Can't you two even read between the lines? Sakura and Sasuke-kun are flirting all the time. It's sickening. Flirting, Shikamaru parroted, sounding disbelieving. He made a face. Geez, if that's what you think courtship is supposed to look like, then maybe I should just forego romance altogether. Yeah, Choji said, nodding. I'm with Shikamaru on this one. If that's what you call flirting. Quote. Ino scoffed. I'm surrounded by idiots, she muttered. You two don't know the first thing about romance, do you? She shook her head. Why? Next I suppose you'll be saying you can't even tell Naruto and Hinata are an item. Quote. Shikamaru blinked. Wait, what? He said. Choji stared at Ino, looking similarly astonished. Those two. An item. Ino stared at the two, unwilling to believe that they could possibly be this oblivious. After a moment's thought, and the slowly dawning realization that, yes, her teammates really were that thick, she let out a miserable groan. I can't believe I'm supposed to work with you idiots, she bemoaned. Yeah, right back at you, Ino, Shikamaru muttered. Choji's attention shifted back to the meat on the grill. Well, enough talk, he said. Smells like lunch is ready. Ino scowled, but reluctantly grabbed her chopsticks. Shikamaru mentally debated the merits of competing with his teammates for the food versus just getting something out of the fridge once he got home. For his part, Asuma was greatly enjoying his impromptu restroom rendezvous with Kurenai. Neji was a genius. He would not be the first to tell you this, but Lee and Tenten both spoke highly enough of his skills, without any need for prompting. The former would in a mix of envy and admiration, and the latter would out of simple respect. Neji was the rookie of the year in his graduating CL. His grades had all been very good, with high marks across the board. Practically every last one of his academy instructors agreed that he held the most promise out of all his CL mates, and several of his former teachers had a running pool on and he would be promoted to Junin. There was very good money on him making the cut before his 18th birthday. Neji was a veritable taijutsu prodigy, scarcely 14 yet already nearing definite mastery of the subtle and formidable gentle fist style. He could already go toe-to-toe with most Chunin in hand-to-hand combat, and his practical and theoretical grasp of the Hyuga clan's secret arts was virtually second to none. Neji had all the makings of an excellent shinobi. Certainly there were those who doubted the boy's emotional hang-ups, and questioned whether he would truly grow into a stable and well-adjusted soldier of the leaf, but most trusted that he could come to terms with his issues, given sufficient time. And, all of that aside, he did have the skill. Neji was an excellent fighter, with a cool temperament and, seemingly, level head. Even people who weren't fond of the boy could appreciate his combat prowess, and his grasp of the ninjutsu fundaments. Neji's peers admired him greatly, even those who dearly longed to knock him down a peg could at least respect his ability. But all of that respect would probably fly out the window if they could see him right now. Neji Hyuga, Rookie of the Year, Gentle Fist Prodigy, wielder of the strongest and purest Byakugan of his generation, was cowering behind a rack of brooms and mops, right next to a shelf of miscellaneous cleaning supplies. There was dust in his hair, and his clothes were disheveled. He was hiding. Oh, Neji Nisan tilde. Wherever might you be tilde? That honeyed, chirping voice sent shivers down Neji's spine. The bad kind of shivers. The fear kind. His cousin was terrifying. A tuneless humming reached his ears, wafting easily through the paper-thin sliding door. Neji's pulse skyrocketed at the sound, and he started shivering despite himself. His face was chalk white. You are my friend, hum. You are my dream, hum. Do you remember when? Hum. Da na, da, the distance. Neji bit back a whimper, and he prayed to every god, kami, and saint he'd ever heard of that Hinata Hyuga would not deign to activate her Byakugan. If she did, it was as good as over. He really didn't know what the girl would do if she found him, but considering what had happened the day after her academy graduation. Well, Neji had to admit that he'd never been particularly pleasant to the girl. Not that he'd ever been outright hostile, considering that Hiyashi-sama had activated his father's curse mark over the man just glaring at his daughter. But Hinata was obviously unstable. A historical lack of blatant bellicosity on Neji's part would hardly save him from sharing the fate of his more unfortunate family members if the girl up and snapped again. And he had certainly turned his nose up at her enough times in the past to worry about her possibly holding a grudge. Ever since that event, which had quickly become known as the Hinata Massacre, because for all their stoicism and pomposity, most of the elder Hyuga had a guilty fondness for puns and EJI had taken to avoiding Hinata as much as possible. And it actually wasn't too difficult, at first. Hiyashi-sama had quite sensibly relieved the prickly and obstinate Neji of any duties which might bring him into close contact with the girl shortly after her rampage, for fear that he might set her off with his Neji-ness. But it seemed that Hinata had noticed his absence, and she was becoming increasingly fixated on him. She actively sought him out, now, and Neji had grown fearful that Hinata would ultimately find him just in time to have another violent episode. He'd not been so worried about it at first, but as time passed he became more aware of Hinata's vastly improved skills. A few of the stronger and more arrogant clansmen had stubbornly refused to accept that this shy little wallflower had hospitalized nearly a tenth of their number, and thus had, one by one, challenged her to spars over the past few weeks. Not one of them lasted more than 10 seconds. Neji had covertly espied one of these spars, and had been frightened to see the girl effortlessly dismantling a pair of men who were collectively almost 3 decades her senior. These were no weaklings, either. They had been tried and proven experts of the gentle fist, tempered and hardened shinobi whose skills even Neji secretly, admired was a bit of a strong word, but they were very good fighters, and he knew it. And Hinata took them down without breaking a sweat. Her smile didn't even falter. That had put things into perspective for him. Namely, that Hinata Hyuga was terrifying. So Neji did his damnedest to avoid her whenever possible, even at the cost of his own dignity. It had certainly been galling to hear Tenten giggle and guffaw over seeing him duck into the bushes the other day when Hinata had come calling at his team's training ground, but when push came to shove Neji happened to prioritize his personal well-being over other people's perceptions of him. Although the glimmer of mirth in Lee's eyes had almost been enough to make him seriously consider suicide by cousin. Neji felt a chill go down his spine as Hinata's footsteps, light and nearly inaudible, came closer to his hiding place. His breath caught in his throat, and his heart nearly leapt out of his chest. Neji Nisan, came Hinata's voice, frighteningly near and clear. She was right outside the broom closet. Why won't you come out and talk to me? It has been a very long time since we've last spoken. Neji was stiff as a board, and white as a sheet. Silently whispered prayers for mercy died on his lips, hearing a hand come to rest on the paper-thin shoji door. A sliver of light found its way into the dark closet. Neji shrank behind the mops and brooms, hearing the door slide open. The slender beam of luminescence spread, widening as the shade was parted. Light fell across his face, and he beheld 2 shimmering opal orbs. The last of Neji's hopes died and shriveled up somewhere between his liver and kidneys. Ah, there you are, Hinata chirped, beaming at her older cousin. I have been looking everywhere for you, Neji Nisan tilde. The stoic Hyuga prodigy whimpered. The International Journeyman Advancement Examinations, known more commonly today as the Chunin exams, were first held in Konoha a little over 60 years ago, the product of a tentative collaboration between Tobarama Senju and the other 5 genin from the greater hidden villages were sent to the Leaf to participate in a test of the Nadime's own devising, a 3-stage series of challenges designed to prove the worth of candidates for promotion to Chunin. It was virtually unheard of at the time. Before the founding of the hidden villages, there hadn't really been any sort of concrete ranking system for shinobi. Back when it was just the various ninja clans fighting amongst themselves, missions were simply entrusted to whoever was available at the time, and it wasn't until Madara and Hashirama came along that anyone bothered to actually try and work out a better system. Ranking missions according to difficulty, price and igning them to shinobi of appropriate skill was a relatively recent idea, a response by the Senju and Uchiha patriarchs to the senseless loss of life they had witnessed in their youth during the Warring States era. Hashirama and Madara were visionaries, even if the latter did wind up going batshit and trying to destroy the village he helped create. From the beginning, those two had focused on the big picture, leaving the details up to Tobarama. He was the one who figured that it would be expedient to rank shinobi in a similar manner to how they ranked missions. The Ge-Chu-Ju naming scheme was Madara's contribution, while the D through S system of mission ranking was conceived by Hashirama. Tobarama, like always, wound up being the one to figure out the specifics of what would qualify a mission for a particular rank, and accordingly devise how those missions would be ignited among the village shinobi. That was just what he did. From the time they were kids, Hashirama was the one who would go off spouting all these crazy ideas, while Tobarama was the one who would cover for him. He was the guy who took all the wild, ambitious dreams of the first Hokage and worked out how to actually make those things happen. Like the Chunin exams, Hashirama had wanted a fair and logical way for ninja to rise through the ranks, and he'd kicked around plenty of crazy and impractical ideas during his tenure as Hokage, but it wasn't until Tobarama took up the hat that anything was actually done. It was the Nadime who determined how to test the readiness of genin for promotion to Chunin, the specific qualities they would look for, intelligence, adaptability, and martial prowess, all set in the context of one's fitness to lead squads out into the field. Tobarama was the one who negotiated with the other nations to send their own genin over to take the exams he ultimately devised, convincing them to use it as a proxy for war if they had to. He was the one who began the tradition of the Chunin exams, who laid down the various regulations and bylaws governing it. Many students might have overlooked the second Hokage for not being as monstrously powerful and charismatic as the first, or as subtly skillful and diplomatic as the third, Tobarama did more to shape the infrastructure and laws of the hidden villages than any other Kage. Period. Hashirama and Madara were the ones who got the bright idea to found a village, but Tobarama was the one who figured out how to keep that village running. Hiruzen Sarutobi, having served as Hokage for over 50 years altogether, had a deep and abiding respect for his late mentor. Tobarama Senju had been an administrative genius, and even if the sum of the man's internal policies had come back to bite Konoha in that the Uchiha clans attempted in bitterness at a perceived marginalization within the village was a glaring example, there could be no ignoring everything he had done for the organization and infrastructure of the Hidden Leaf. Hiruzen, who had come to be known as the professor in his autumn years, chewed absent-mindedly on his pipe as he skimmed over some very important paperwork. Preparations for the Chunin exams were underway in the village. The proctors for the 3 stages of the exams had all been chosen, and the details of the tests were being hammered out between them. Materials and manpower were requested for upkeep and repair of the tower in the Forest of Death, as training ground number 44 had come to be known among younger generations. Forms for the IGN meant of missions to increase highway patrols in the coming months required the Hokage's signature. Messenger hawks were being put through their paces, and Anbu was knuckling down to ensure that not so much as a pocket would be picked when the foreign delegates came up for the final phase. All of this left Hiruzen feeling quite nostalgic. He remembered the hustle and bustle of the village when Tobarama Sensei, Nadime-sama, initiated preparations for the very first Chunin exams. Nobody had been quite sure what to expect, back then, Hiruzen and his teammates included. But when it came time for everything to start, well, the exams went off without a hitch. Hiruzen rightly earned his advancement to Chunin, he and Danzo the very first Leaf Ninja to ever be promoted through the exams, matching wits and fists in the final round of the third phase, and the other Cage were suitably impressed, well and truly erred of the feasibility and usefulness of the exams. The Sandame smiled, puffing on his pipe as he thought back on all the Chunin exams he had witnessed over years. He'd seen ninja make showings that put his genin self to shame, the likes of Kakashi and Itachi and the legendary Sanin, and blustering idiots who made complete s of themselves, and determined underdogs who managed to overturn the odds through sheer grit and force of will. Idly, thinking of what Kakashi had told him about Team 7, the Lord Third wondered which category Naruto and his friends would fall into. He smiled, then, and scrawled his signature across the dotted line of another requisition form. This would be a very interesting exam. Kakashi watched, only mildly bemused, as his genin ran through the teamwork exercises he'd ignited them. Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto moved in perfect synchronization, more like a single organism than three young soldiers. By this point, Kakashi was in no position to claim that this surprised him. Whatever their relations to one another had been in the academy, these three had quite clearly cast aside their differences. They worked together flawlessly, pulling off even the trickiest of maneuvers without so much as a hitch. It was like watching the gears of a grandfather clock in motion. Not a finger moved without purpose, and every step they took carried the whole squad forward. Team 7 in action was a thing of beauty. It was more than a tad surreal, to be honest. Most seasoned Junin couldn't do even half the things these kids did. The little buggers were impossibly skilled. Were Kakashi a more paranoid sort, he might think they'd been replaced by weirdly incompetent infiltrators, ridiculously powerful spies who couldn't even get their character down right. But Sasuke had the Sharingan Mangekyo, the Lord Third had called it, and Naruto definitely still had the UBI in his belly. Kakashi had a Hyuga Sealmaster confirm this for him, just in case. And for all her sudden and inexplicable leaps in strength and skill, Sakura seemed no more likely to be a spy than Naruto or Sasuke. No infiltrator good enough to replace a Jinchuriki or a bloodline clan heir would be so stupid as to exhibit skills so blatantly beyond the grasp of the people they were supposed to be impersonating. Nay, as unbelievable as it seemed, somehow Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura had honestly, genuinely grown more in the course of a few nights than most shinobi grew over their entire lifetimes. It was like Hokage-sama had told him. Naruto, of course, has access to the nine-tailed fox's chakra, as I'm sure you are well aware, the Sandame intoned, seated across from Kakashi in the former's study. He is the Lord Fourth Hokage's son, heir and successor of Kushina Uzumaki. Even if, up until this point, he has seemingly squandered his talents on chicanery and jests, I still do not doubt that he has the makings of an excellent shinobi. Kakashi nodded, accepting this well enough. Aside from his arsenal of perverted prank jutsu, Naruto has demonstrated a firm grasp of several highly diverse ninja arts in the weeks since I began training Team 7. Much better than someone who was bottom of his CL should have. Quote, Minato was a physical learner as well, the Sandame remarked. Although he also scored well in theory, it was undeniably in practical exercises where he truly excelled. Kakashi hummed, glancing thoughtfully at a spot on the wall. That makes sense, I suppose, he mused. Sasuke has obviously been giving him and Sakura pointers. Especially Sakura. I hear those two have grown quite close, Hiruzen commented shrewdly. Something like a smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Kakashi nodded. Yeah, he murmured. I haven't got the whole story, of course, but she and Naruto were probably there when Sasuke lost his arm. The Sandame nodded, as though this were entirely sensible to him. Has he confided in you with any details of the accident? The old shinobi inquired. Kakashi shook his head. No, but it's obvious that those two know more than Sasuke's telling. All things considered, I think the three of them must have been training together for the bell test. There was probably an accident with a new technique he was trying to learn, or else he and Naruto got a little too feisty while sparring. Hiruzen nodded, hands folded under his chin. Dark eyes glinted thoughtfully. It is not outside the realm of belief, he said, his words carefully measured. If anything, that would explain the sudden evolution of young Sasuke's eyes. Kakashi frowned. He felt a dry itch in Obito's eye at the mention of Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan. He probably awakened it in the aftermath of the massacre. Considering what you've told me about how the Uchiha's Dujutsu works, he said slowly, thoughtfully. The Sandaime nodded. Right, he said. I do not doubt that such a magnitude of survivor's guilt would be sufficient to activate the Mangekyo. Nor is it unbelievable that the emotional turmoil resulting from that tragedy might have subsequently locked away those very eyes. Quote. His words hung in the air, curiously heavy. Kakashi felt a little vaguely foolish over all this baseless conjecture, but Sasuke did not give him much to work with as far as the truth. And the shock of losing a limb probably broke through his mental block, right? He guessed, meeting the Hokage's eye. That is the most probable explanation, Hiruzen said with a nod. And more than likely it also unlocked some deeply repressed memories from that night. The elderly shinobi frowned almost imperceptibly. He furrowed his brow, and hummed quietly in his throat. His lips tightened into a thin line, and he met Kakashi's eye. You are certain he has not demonstrated any signs of emotional instability? Kakashi shrugged, feeling rather at a loss. Honestly, first impressions aside, he actually seems to be remarkably well adjusted. His one eye narrowed, and I don't mean just superficially, either. His relationship with Naruto and Sakura appears stable and healthy, and he hasn't exhibited any particular fixation on revenge since his introduction. The third Hokage's expression was unreadable. He doesn't, does he? The man whispered. Curious. Good for him, of course, but still, curious. Do you think this is something to worry about, Hokage-sama? Quote. Kakashi said, noticing a faintly concerned tone in the elderly ninja's voice. If this is a byproduct of the Mangekyo. Hiruzen shook his head. The kaleidoscopic mirror wheel comes about with a hormonal metamorphosis, he said, triggered by a certain chemical tail released when a Sharingan wielder undergoes a considerable emotional trauma. The Lord Third exhaled a cloud of smoke, pausing thoughtfully. Among the more troublesome side effects of this transformation is an increased flow of chakra through specific parts of the brain, such as the amygdala, hypothalamus, and hippocampus, he continued. Over time this causes gradual enlargement of those regions, resulting in unpredictable mood swings and a marked increase of aggressive tendencies. The professor hummed, meeting Kakashi's eye. So, if anything, I would have expected awakening the Mangekyo to greatly strengthen young Sasuke's desire for vengeance. That he should seem less fixated on revenge now than he was before awakening those eyes is very curious. Quote. He trailed off for a moment, staring thoughtfully into the distance, before shaking his head and muttering. Quote. It is potentially fortuitous, to be certain, but still highly unusual. Thinking back on that discussion, Kakashi got the distinct impression that the Sandaime had known more than he said. He did not question it, though. They were ninja, after all. Secrets were their bread and butter. Besides, if it was really important for him to know, Kakashi had faith that the Sandaime would see fit to tell him. The young members of Team 7 were certainly inexplicably skilled, and they acted strangely at times, but the odds of them being spies or plants were infinitesimal, and the chances of them having been getting lessons from outsiders or other suspicious persons were similarly minute. So for now, at least, Kakashi could give them the benefit of a doubt. Naruto's Jutsu was very compelling. Time passed without much of note happening, despite everything. Team 7's laissez-faire attitude towards their presence in the past had raised some eyebrows amongst those who didn't kn. How the truth of the situation, which was everyone but them and Hinata, but not much of importance, had really changed. Mostly it was little things, like Naruto playing more frequently with Konohamaru and friends, and Sakura introducing Sasuke to her parents. Despite them both being physically 12, said introduction was still infinitely less awkward than the last time Sakura had brought her teammate turned enemy turned teammate turned boyfriend turned husband turned teammate turned boyfriend home for the first time. Less complicated, too. And of course, Naruto took no small delight in molding the once more malleable minds of Udon and Moegi. Konohamaru may have been his faithful protege even as an adult, but Ebisu had regretfully gotten to the boys' teammates and made them dreadfully ordinary. The grown-up Udon and Moegi had been two of the most boring people Naruto knew. The less said about the Hyuga, the better. Last one to Ichiraku's is a loser. The former Lord 7th Hokage jeered, cackling as he shot down the street. No fair, boss, wait for us. Ah, Naruto Nichan, hold up, you cheater. Don't go so fast. The Konohamaru Corps chased after their boss idol, Naruto Uzumaki, following him through the streets of Konoha. Huffing and puffing as they tried to keep up with the faster, seemingly inexhaustible blonde, Konohamaru and friends made quite a sight with their ruddy faces screwed up in concentration. Naruto beamed as he led the young academy students up and down the streets, laughing and whooping as he darted nimbly around pedestrians. He kept a steady pace 3 strides ahead of the trio at all times, leading the kids on a merry chase through the village. Don't be sore losers, now. Naruto cheerfully called over his shoulder. Ha ha ha. Just run, run as fast as you can. Maybe you'll even catch up, if you're lucky. He peered over his shoulder just in time to see a red-faced Konohamaru reply to this statement with a very rude hand gesture. Naruto laughed. Is that all you've got? Hurry up, hurry up. I haven't even gotten warmed up. He chortled, striking a very theatrical pose while continuing to run, which produced a fairly comical effect. Moegi giggled in spite of herself, and Udon joined in with a half-delirious guffaw. Konohamaru defiantly shook his fist at Naruto. The blonde laughed even more gaily than before, and spun fluidly around a black-clad young man, slipping between him and his pretty blonde companion. Without missing a beat, he was behind the pair and continuing on down the street. At least, he was until he heard a boyish, oof, and a distantly familiar annoyed grunt. Hey, twerp, watch where you're going. That hurt, you know. Oh, Kankuro. Still just as terrible with kids as ever. And still somehow just as good as getting the drop on Naruto, too. Let go of me, you big jerk. Naruto turned around, mildly bemused. Was it really starting already? He glanced curiously between Temari and Kankuro, looking at their backs. This statement did not include Temari's to any exceptional degree. Naruto could, as Jiraiya's former apprentice, appreciate beautiful young women, but 15 years old was towing the line of too young for his tastes. He made a conscious exception for Hinata, because she was his wife, and he loved her no matter what she looked like. Konohamaru. Moegi squealed, dismayed, breaking Naruto out of his musings. Oh dear, oh dear. Udon whimpered, trembling worriedly at the sight of this intimidating foreigner lifting their friend and ringleader by the collar. Kankuro sneered, and tightened his grip. Konohamaru, huh, he drawled. Is that your name, twerp? Hey, talk about uninspired. You Konoha pansies. Temari scowled, impatiently side-eyeing her middle brother. Don't waste your time on this brat, Kankuro, she said coolly, evenly. It wouldn't be worth the trouble. Kankuro rolled his eyes. Who cares? I'm just gonna teach the punk to watch where he's going, he said dismissively. You could say I'm doing him a favor, really. It's a very valuable life lesson. Konohamaru swung his legs mutinously. Had his captor been a little less astute, the lad might have scored a hit on the older boy's shin. Kankuro was nothing if not prudent, however, and he deftly evaded the lad's flailing. Let me go. Konohamaru snarled, thrashing angrily but ineffectively. His increased resistance seemed to rile up Moegi and Udon, who clenched their fists and advanced on the much larger Kankuro. Temari sighed and inched away from her brother, looking like she had no patience for this stupid macho posturing. Kankuro snorted, and curled his free hand into a fist. You should be more respectful to your elders, he sneered, bringing his knuckles up in a blur. Naruto caught Kankuro's first before it even came close to touching Konohamaru, appearing beside Kankuro faster than you could say, holy shit where'd he come from? The Cage's middle child blinked. His head swiveled to the side, and he stared confusedly at this spiky-haired blonde interloper. Konohamaru slowed his wriggling, and a smirk came onto his face. Ha, you're in for it now, you big jerk. He crowed. Naruto Nichan is gonna kick your. Temari choked back a laugh at the gobsmacked expression on her brother's face. Naruto smiled innocently. I'm sure I have no idea what you mean by that, Konohamaru, he said loftily. After all, It's not like a foreign shinobi visiting Konoha for the Chunin exams would ever be stupid enough to try and do anything to the Sandame's grandson. His innocent smile widened, and Kankuro blinked twice more. The young puppet master went visibly white under his kabuki face paint. He squeaked. The Sandames. He trailed off, staring at Konohamaru in slowly dawning horror. Tamari now looked neither bored nor amused. If anything, she seemed the slightest touch frightened underneath the anger. Why look, she shot at her brother. Kankuro, she growled warningly. I told you. Now Kankuro went puce, and he dropped Konohamaru like a hot potato. Ahaha, now, I know what this might look like, he said, his voice cracking, but it's perfectly innocent, honest. Quote. Naruto smiled. I'm sure it is, he said sweetly. Just like I'm sure your teammates won't kill you in your sleep for almost getting them kicked out of the village before the exams could even start. Quote. Kankuro paled once more, and Tamari fingered the fan strapped to her back with a vicious grin on her face. Naruto then looked up into the branches of a nearby tree. He grinned brightly. Hey, Gaara, he said to the gourd-bearing redhead. Wanna join me at Ichiraku's for some ramen later? You can bring your team along too, if you want. He waved, beaming at his fellow Jinchuriki. Konohamaru, Moegi, and Udon and awed at Naruto's ability to detect the third foreigner hidden from sight. Tamari and Kankuro stared in horrified disbelief at the apparently suicidal blonde. Gaara blinked owlishly, surprised. I nominate Team 7. The Hokage's office fell into a heavy silence following these words. Kakashi Hatake stood at attention in a manner that nonetheless bespoke a deceptive laziness, a kind of disinterested insolence that very few people could pull off, to say nothing of actually getting away with it. All around him, his fellow Junin expressed their surprise at their colleague's choice to nominate a rookie squad for Chunin examination. The Sandame had only just finished officially announcing the Chunin exams, and already Kakashi was suggesting that his team should take it. For those who hadn't heard about Team 7's uncannily exceptional performance on missions, it beggared belief that the copy ninja could seriously have such a skewed perspective as to nominate his squad for the exams without even the tiniest sign of hesitation. Then, a moment later, Kurenai Yuahi stepped forward and nominated Team 8, looking perfectly confident in her students' abilities. And not to be outdone, Asuma Sarutobi stepped forward immediately after her and put forth his Team 10 for consideration as well. It was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop, and Genma looked very sheepish as he picked his Senbon back up off the floor, although his jaw was still visibly slack. Not an eye in the house wasn't staring at Kakashi, Kurenai, and Asuma, whether simply gobsmacked and blatantly disbelieving, or else trying in vain to puzzle out their motives. Hiruzen puffed on his pipe, curiously eyeing the three young Junin leaders. His glance was hooded, his face an unreadable stony mask, and if his eyes lingered a second longer on his son than on the others, then nobody was saying anything. Do you, now, he said, the gravely rasp of his voice cutting through the silence. He folded his hands, humming thoughtfully. I must say, this is highly unusual. Not one, or even two, but 3 rookie squads. He narrowed his eyes. Are you all quite sure of this? These exams are nothing to sneeze at, as you should well know. Kakashi scoffed. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I'd be nominating them for Junin consideration if you hadn't already told me that they need to pee the Chunin exams first. He said. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura are ready for promotion. More than ready. Asuma rolled his eyes at this. I never would have pegged you for the sentimental sort, Kakashi, he drawled, shaking his head. But as for my team, I honestly think it would be a good learning experience for him. Ought to be a good kick in the pants for those slackers, he said wryly, a hint of fondness in his tone. And I reckon at least one of them might actually make the cut, to be perfectly honest. Quote. Kurenai afforded a smirk at this remark, her eyes gleaming amusedly. Team 8 has really come into its own as well, she said, all but swelling up with pride. Hinata in particular has demonstrated exceptional maturity and leadership qualities. She's set an excellent example for her teammates, and all 3 have helped each other grow a good deal. Well, mostly it had been Hinata helping Shino and Kiba grow, but Kurenai didn't feel any particular need to give away too much of her prize pupil's talent. It wouldn't do to scare off the competition, after all. Hiruzen took a drag of his pipe, and he cast his gaze over the three Junin sensei. He saw a mixture of pride, confidence, and stubborn determination in each of them. It almost reminded him of his own sensei's eyes, when the man had first confronted the other Kage with the idea of the Chunin exams, all but outright challenging them to send their best and brightest ninja to try and discredit him and his pupils. Resisting the urge to smile at the swell of nostalgia, the Sandaime slowly nodded. He exhaled, smoke billowing from his lips, and closed his eyes. Well, then, he said. If you three are that confident in your team's chances. Uruka sputtered, unable to hold back his disbelief any longer. This is preposterous, he protested, pointing at the three Junin. You can't honestly be saying you think they're seriously ready to take on the Chunin exams. Exclamation mark quote. Of course they are, Kakashi said dismissively. Kurenai and Asuma nodded in general agreement. Uruka turned a very interesting shade of red. You're pushing them too far, he exclaimed. Times are different now than they were when you three were young. Those kids may be your genin, but they're still my students. Hiruzen resisted the urge to sigh as the argument unfolded, Uruka Yumino's words coming narrowly close to insubordination. If it weren't for Guy stepping forward in agreement with Uruka's stance, things might have gotten ugly, and Kaka's. Hai did not pull his punches, whether fighting or debating. Under other circumstances, Hiruzen may have been inclined to agree with Uruka, but these 9 rookies were all exceptional prospects. Even the least remarkable among their number showed a fair deal of talent and cunning. Uruka was a good man, to be sure, but that wasn't always the most desirable trait in shinobi. It didn't help that this was his first graduating CL, either. Uruka was naturally very attached to these kids, and would of course be inclined to have them. Well, some might call the man's approach coddling, but Hiruzen had a soft spot for children himself. Kakashi, however, did not appear to agree. They're not your students anymore, Uruka, the copy ninja finished coolly, with a steely edge to his words. They are soldiers under my command. With that verbal slap in the face, Kakashi turned and walked away. Uruka stared as the man went, visibly cringing from those words. Asuma winced, and he muttered, ouch. Low blow, under his breath. Kurenai gave Uruka a sympathetic smile. Well, he was a bit harsh in how he said it, she said, but the gist of it isn't necessarily inaccurate. Besides, I know my team has improved by leaps and bounds since graduating. You shouldn't underestimate those former students of yours, or they might just end up usurping. Uruka chuckled weakly, and returned the smile with a slow nod. Why yeah, thanks, he said. He's right, of course. Haha, I guess I'm just a little upset to see them growing up so fast. Kurenai gave him a comforting pat on the shoulder, before turning back to sidle up next to Asuma as other Junin sensei proceeded to nominate their own teams for the exams. Shino was a quiet sort of fellow. Even when spoken to, he did not talk unless he felt like he had something of genuine importance to say, and he was never needlessly loud, he did not yell or shout or holler. He was subtler than that. When Shino wanted to make himself heard, he simply spoke his mind. If the people he was talking to had any sense, then they would listen to what he had to say. If they didn't, then they clearly weren't worth the trouble. That's what his father had taught him, anyways. Subtlety and silence were hallmarks of the shinobi. No ninja worth his salt would go off screaming at the top of his lungs. Speak softly yet firmly, and never about trivial matters. People who could be swayed by loud voices and meaningless chatter were not worth a true shinobi's time. That's what he had learned from his father. Kiba was an idiot, impulsive and obnoxious, and far too quick to anger over little and meaningless things. The hound user practically defaulted to violence as the only worthwhile method of problem solving, and he pretty used his head only as far as physically bashing it against the nearest obstacle. He was loud and fickle and impulsive, the very antithesis of everything Shino had been taught to value in a ninja. However, Kiba was also fiercely loyal, as quick to make friends as enemies. He had not been put off by the Aburame Haiden like most would have been, rather, he thought it was wicked, which he would say with a thumbs up and a toothy grin. Shino had never before encountered someone who could earnestly call his Kikaichu colony cool. It was a rather nice feeling, in all honesty. Kiba was probably the first real friend Shino had ever had outside his own clan. Despite their differences, he and Kiba were fast and true, and as thick as thieves. They butted heads plenty, in their own little ways, but at the end of the day both the Aburame and the Inuzuka highly valued camaraderie. Even if their ideas of it were as different as night and day, loyalty was still something that both prized above all else. Under other circumstances, Shino supposed that he and Kiba might have been at odds more often than not. Had Hinata not stepped so brilliantly into the position, the two males might have spent a lot of their time both subtly and overtly vying for the spot of team leader. But as it was, Hinata had Yumed the role, and she did a magnificent job of it, too. She seemed like a real natural, and neither Kiba or Shino had any problems with deferring to her. It was funny, in a way, that a girl who had seemed so quiet and reserved in the academy would wind up the distinct superior of someone as competitive and stubborn as Kiba, but Hinata really didn't nay. To be boastful or aggressive. She led with a soft touch, letting them think as often as not that they were acting of their own initiative when they did as she asked. She indulged them when it was convenient, and kept them in line with carefully chosen compliments and critiques. She pulled their strings like a puppet master working her marionettes, and most scarily of all she did it so warmly and kindly that neither of them could find any fault with it. Even the willful, bull-headed Kiba saw nothing wrong with doing what Hinata asked of him. Shino supposed that the Inuzuka probably had a tiny bit of a crush on her. Not that he could criticize this. He himself felt rather quietly giddy whenever he could sneak a covert glance at Kurenai-sensei, and perhaps intentionally messed up his kata once or twice just so she would correct him. This was only natural, of course. She was a very lovely, very mature woman appointed with teaching and guiding them, and Shino was at that early, pleasantly confusing stage of puberty where he was just starting to really enjoy being around the opposite. However, he also knew that Kurenai and Hinata were each interested in someone else, and that it was very unlikely either of them would ever give him or Kiba the time of day. And Shino was okay with that. Kiba may have been in denial, though. Yeah, I think we're definitely gonna breeze right through this, the tattooed lad quietly boasted as they strolled up to the third floor of the academy. Those other losers don't stand a chance against me and Akamaru. Quote. He grinned at Hinata, who smiled indulgently and nodded. If you say so, Kiba-kun, she said politely. She spoke his name fondly, like that of a good friend or a close sibling. Kiba may have misinterpreted this. You won't even need to get your hands dirty, Hinata, he said, grinning wryly. I bet there's not a person here who could take me on in a fight. This declaration earned Kiba a dirty look from a few of the other genin teams climbing the stairs, but he didn't seem to notice. He was strutting self-assuredly to the testing area, confident that Team 8 would pee these exams with flying colors. Hinata giggled at the sight of Kiba with his chest puffed out. He beamed, apparently taking this as a mark of approval. Shino quietly followed his teammates to the testing area, corrugating his brow in thought. Kiba's confidence was not particularly contagious in this instance. Frowning beneath his coat collar, the young Aburame pushed his sungles up on the bridge of his nose. He shot a warning look at his male teammate. You shouldn't get too why, he cautioned. These exams will be attracting genin from all across the continent, and many of them will be far more experienced than ourselves. Age and cunning can easily triumph over youth and skill. Kiba scoffed. Don't be such a worrywart, Shino. They aren't the only ones with tricks up their sleeves. He grinned toothily. Hinata smiled, looking between her two teammates. Indeed they are not, she agreed. You two are very skilled for your age. Shino and Kiba looked at her. Ha, the latter guffawed. If we're skilled, then you're a damn genius. Shino nodded. You're easily the strongest member of this team, he said. We know this because we've seen you in action. Kiba blushed. Yeah, he said, scratching his cheek. You've done some damn good work. You know, with your kata and training and all. Quote. You two have improved markedly more than I have, Hinata said with a dismissive wave of her hand. My own skills are, she shrugged, trailing off. A result of actually being 10 years older than both of you put together, went unsaid, and her true meaning ped right over Kiba and Shin O's heads. As far as they knew, she was just being modest. They couldn't possibly appreciate that, out of the 4 people to have come back in time, Hinata Uzumaki ne Hyuga was actually the least powerful. She was just skilled by the standards of ordinary humans. Compared to monsters like Naruto and Sasuke. Well, Hinata was just as good as an elite Junin, maybe on par with some of the lower tier Kage. In contrast, Sakura was pretty much second in power only to her teammates. Theoretically, the Pinkett was good enough to go toe-to-toe with Hashirama or Madara at the top of their game. Excuse me, miss, but what might your name be? Quote, well, speak of the devil. Team 8 came onto into an open area, a landing between stairwells. They were not the only ones there. Sakura. Oh, a most beautiful name for a most beautiful maiden. A bowl-cut, black-haired youth in tight green spandex struck a pose that might have been cool 2 generations prior, standing before the members of Team 7. Please, Sakura-san, he exclaimed, will you not go out with me? I swear, I will protect you with my life. Naruto snorted, and Sasuke ground his teeth. Shino quirked a single eyebrow, and Kiba glowered at Hinata's other friends. Team 8 went unnoticed by the trio, who were focused understandably on the green-clad lad. Kiba skulked sulkingly up the stairs, clearly not in the mood for a meeting with Team 7 right now. Shino followed him, only mildly interested in the romantic dramedy proceeding below them. Hinata lingered behind for only a moment, before turning to follow her teammates up to the 3rd floor. She blew a kiss to Naruto, who looked over his shoulder and silently smiled at her. And so now we join Team 7 in media res. Sakura tittered and curtsied, smiling kindly at the athletic older boy. She did not give any indication of having noticed Hinata and friends ping on through, smiling politely at Rock Lee, for this was, of course, who addressed her. Oh, my, you flatter me, Lee-kun, she said. But I'm afraid to say that I am already spoken for. You have my apologies. A twinkle came into her eye, the glittering mischief of a precocious matchmaker as she stood back up from her curtsy. Perhaps you should try looking a little closer to home, she suggested, thinking of a certain teammate of his. Lee edged his head to one side, staring at Sakura uncomprehendingly. You are spoken for already, he said, sounding miserably disappointed. Sakura's smile softened, and she felt a pang of sympathy for the poor, impressionable lad. He couldn't really help being such a sucker for a pretty face. And Sakura was very pretty, in her personal opinion, so Lee could hardly help himself. Closing parenthesis. I'm sorry, she told him, smiling sincerely. You seem like a very nice guy, and I'm sure there's a girl somewhere out there who would be glad to have you. Maybe even someone you already know. She suggested again, thinking of a certain brunette. Sasuke resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Sakura had been insisting for years that Lee and Tenten could make a perfect couple, and nothing he said could dissuade her from this notion. She was very stubborn when it came to matters of romance, and Naruto did not help things on that front, either. If anything, the blonde had taken to egging Sakura on, and encouraging her more troublesome matchmaking proclivities. Sasuke himself could not give less of a damn about other people's lives, but Naruto and Sakura were always hatching harebrained schemes to pair off their friends and acquaintances. At least 2 marriages had come about as a direct result of their machinations, Choji and Karui, and Kiba and Tamaki, plus a number of brief flings and one-night stands. He could still remember their rather disastrous go at hooking up Shino with Kiba's sister. By the time the dust had settled, nearly 30 people were in need of hospitalization, and several million ryo in property damage had been done. And that was just the first date. Sasuke fought down a shudder, and decided that it would be in everyone's best interests for him to intervene now. For every happy couple to result from Naruto and Sakura's compulsive matchmaking, there were a half-dozen explosive breakups, and more than a few strongly worded restraining orders. He was not in the mood to see what kind of drama could erupt from a self-destructed Lee-Ten relationship. Lee, the Uchiha heir growled the taijutsu specialist's name. Weren't you going to challenge me to a spar? Lee blinked. He frowned, and turned to stare at Sasuke. Was I? He said confusedly, looking a touch skeptical as he glanced down at Sasuke's missing arm. A frown tilted his eyebrows, curling his lips downward. I don't know. Of course you were, Sasuke said flippantly. Why else would you come seek us out? Maybe he wanted to challenge me, Naruto interjected, a glimmer of laughter in his eyes. I'd like to think my reputation really precedes me these days. Sakura snorted, a most unladylike noise. Yeah, right, she said. The only reputation you have is as a CL clown. And I am hilarious, he said with a grin. Hilariously full of yourself, maybe, Sasuke said, rolling his eyes. Naruto scoffed. Oh, please, like you're one to talk. Sakura smirked, and wrapped an arm around the raven-haired Uchiha's waist. I wouldn't mind being full of you, dear, she purred into Sasuke's ear, giving him an all too suggestive wink. Lee went beet red, and averted his gaze anxiously away. Sasuke, for his part, shivered and smiled weakly at his once and future wife. Naruto rolled his eyes. I think that's what most girls our age would say, he quipped. If, you know, they had the guts. Sasuke made a face. I don't know, he muttered. Some of those fangirls were pretty forward, last time around. And that's before even counting the likes of Karen. Naruto looked momentarily confused at this statement. Really? He said thoughtfully, too low for Lee to hear. Damn, I'd almost forgotten. By the time I got to know her, she and Suigetsu were pretty much already an item. It's surreal, isn't it? Sakura whispered in agreement, softly giggling. To think that dumpy, mothering housewife used to be one of Sasuke-kun's most aggressive fangirls. Quote. She mellowed out a lot after the first few kids, said Sasuke with a nod of agreement. Thank God. Sakura nodded, and tightened her arm around Sasuke's waist. With a playful grin, she leaned in to plant a kiss on his cheek. How many was she on? She wondered meaningfully. I can't seem to recall. Last I heard, she and Suigetsu were trying for a seventh, Sasuke said, a hint of disbelief in his expression. Lord only knows how she kept all those brats fed. Quote. She always wanted a big family, though, Naruto interjected. Or so she told me, at least. Yeah, I think she said something similar to me, too, Sakura nodded. And I suppose Suigetsu could make a decent amount of money with his mercenary work. Quote. He participated in lots of medical experiments, too, I understand, Naruto added. Really? Sasuke ed an eyebrow. That's a surprise to me. The blonde shrugged. He said it was nostalgic. Sakura pulled a face. That is so weird. I know, right? Always knew that guy was messed up. Sasuke snorted back a laugh. Lee was at a loss for words as he watched Team 7 carry on talking. He stared, rooted in place by an awkward mix of indecision and politeness, as the trio turned to continue up the stairs, seemingly forgetting him completely. He blinked owlishly. Quote. I wonder what Sakura-san meant by someone closer to home. He quietly puzzled. Perhaps I should ask Tenten. Maybe she'll know something about it. Quote. As Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto disappeared up the stairs, Lee turned and left to look for his own teammates. They are both girls, after all. Tensions in the waiting room were dreadfully high. Genin squads crowded every inch of the room, many of the older ones surly and antsy and just itching to see some blood. Ninja from all over the continent were there, representatives from villages as far-flung as Suna and Aim, eager to bust some heads and prove their worth. Most of these genin were a fair deal older and more experienced than the rookie 9, even Team Guy had only been in active duty for a year and change, to say nothing of cells 7, 8, and 10. But most of the other competitors were hardened, battle-tested shinobi, and almost none of them had any patience for little children. Ino Yamenka did not seem aware of this, as she scanned the room for her crush. She was standing with her teammates, Shikamaru and Choji, not too far from the entrance. Pale blue eyes flicked sharply over the crowd, clear and penetrating as they searched for Sasuke Uchiha. A civilian might have been unnerved by Ino's eyes, with their unnaturally pale blue irises, flat and ostly, devoid of pupils. If eyes were the window to the soul, then young Ino looked like a woman possessed. Shikamaru would have considered this an accurate descriptor, at least whenever she got started on Sasuke-kun. He's not here yet, the shadow user drawled, leaning boredly against a nearby wall. We would have noticed him by now if he'd gotten here before us, and we've seen everyone who has come through that door since we arrived. Quote. Ino shot Shikamaru a dark look, narrowing her eyes and curling her lip. She fidgeted anxiously, clearly overcome with nervous energy. I don't need your snark, Shikamaru. She sniped, flicking her gaze over to the door. Just keep your eyes open. I don't want to miss him. Choji shrugged, looking over his shoulder at some of the other teams in the room. Who's to say they'll be coming? Maybe their sensei doesn't think they're ready for these exams yet, he suggested. Shikamaru sighed. As much as I wish that was the case, Choji, he muttered, if only so Ino would settle down and quit looking for him, we know they'll be here. Asuma told us that Kakashi was the first one to nominate his squad, remember? Quote. Choji got a thoughtful expression on his face, and he slowly nodded his head. Oh yeah, that's right, he said. I'd nearly forgotten about that. He hid his head, looking askance at one of the other Konoha teams. Huh, I dunno, then. Maybe one of them didn't feel up to taking the exams. Asuma-sensei told us it was an all-or-nothing sort of deal, you know, that you need to be in a team of 3 to participate. Sasuke-kun is more than ready for these exams. Ino hissed, giving Choji the evil eye. She took a deep breath, slowly shaking her head. He was never the sort to back down from a challenge, back when we were all at the academy. I don't see why he would feel the need to start now. And Naruto's too dense to even consider that the Chunin exams might be too much for him, Shikamaru drawled, eliciting a nostalgic chuckle from Choji. He's not the brightest, or the strongest, or the most skilled, but that moron's as stubborn as all get out. Ino frowned, her expression darkening. You don't think Sakura would choose to hold Sasuke-kun back, do you? She said. I know those two have been getting close, but if she thinks I'll forgive her for something like that. She clenched her fists, and her eyes flashed. Shikamaru sighed, and he rolled his eyes. Women, he thought ruefully. Whether they're young or old, they're all just as much of a pain in my. Ino shot him a sour look, guessing well enough what her teammate was thinking. Don't you start, Shikamaru, she said warningly. You're not any better. I have no idea what you're talking about, he replied blandly. I didn't say a word. You were thinking it, she growled. I know what you're like. Choji chuckled good-natured DLY, and reclined against the wall. The door opened. Kiba Inuzuka strutted idly into the room, followed shortly by Shino and Hinata. Then he took one look around the room, and his self-urged demeanor promptly deflated, punctured by the weight of several dozen cold-essing glares. Hot damn, are all of these guys seriously genin? He mumbled, suddenly looking much less certain of acing the exam. Yes, probably, said Hinata calmly, sparing a roaring smile for her teammate. Kiba reciprocated only weakly, looking now like he wanted nothing more than for everyone's scrutiny to fall on someone else. Nobody seemed to notice Shino.